there's two parts of this conversation with Mr. Luxon on Q&A. And the first part, they were talking about values. And Jack started up with a very, very, very good saying, because he says, I know that we're talking a lot about the squeezed middle. What about the crushed bottom? That was how he started it to Luxon. And that's where they begun the conversation. And they begun the conversation asking about, you know, obviously Labor, according to National, all bad, right? And doing everything wrong. And especially when it comes to things like social housing, community housing, we would think of it as Housing New Zealand, or now it's called Kāinga Ora, same thing. Labor has a plan for it, right? So how much more money is National going to contribute to solving this problem of community housing, state housing, Kāinga Ora? How much more money are they going to contribute than Labor's doing at the moment? That's where we'll begin the conversation.
So how much funding are you committing to building state houses?
Well, what we're saying there is housing's been an abject failure under Labor. As you well know, when you actually buy a house,
as you well know, is that one? Maybe not.
Rent a house, we go on a state or social house wait list. They're all very connected issues. And so you've actually got to deal with all three aspects of that in housing if you're going to solve the problem. What we're saying in social housing is, look, we think we can make much better use of community housing providers. You know, they are very nimble, they're very quick. They also have very good wraparound and pastoral care support. So how do we get them more capital and funding to do
Okay, so on that, I did a bit of work on this today. Community housing providers. We hear that a lot. What does it mean? Now, what it means, and I did some research on it today, and actually spoke to some people today who might come on tomorrow night and talk about it. What it means is groups like Salvation Army, like the Monte Cecilia House, like Habitat for Humanity. Local councils do it. There's a provider in the Dunedin City Council. There's a website that tells you who all the partners are that do this kind of thing. And basically, they have houses that they rent out as a charitable cause. So this is the government tapping into charities to say, do our job for us. Now, let me say this. I've had a lot to do with the evangelical church. There are some on the right who don't believe government should get involved in charity at all. They believe that churches and the community should look after each other. I'm not suggesting that's exactly what Luxon is saying. I don't know. But he does talk about community housing providers a lot and getting them more capital. A lot of them are faith or church-based organizations. And he wants them to work. I'm not saying he's going to cancel Kāinga Ora, but he's basically saying these groups do it better than Kāinga Ora, and we want to get them more money because they do a better job than what fucking Labor's Kāinga Ora does, because Labor's Kāinga Ora is shit house. Yes, Chewie.
I have a question, Pat. If these groups are overwhelmingly faith-based organisations, and not to say that tar them all with the same brush,
they're not all. No, they're not all.
No.
But yes.
Let's say that I am a young gay or trans person that's been kicked out in the street by my family. I'm underage. I need somewhere to live. I've gone cap in hand to an organisation and says, can I go up? And they go, no, your lifestyle is abhorrent to us and you should die in a ditch. Is this a problem?
I have to say, and I think most of us would agree, I don't know if you don't have to agree with me, Chewie. Some do, some don't. Salvation Army are a gem to society. They do amazing things. Okay, you're going to disagree, that's fine. I don't know the answer to your question. I would hope that they would not, but I don't know if they have that criteria. If we get them on tomorrow night, as I said, I actually spoke to the Southeast today, we can ask them that question. Because if there was a faith-based organization that said, actually your lesbian family with 2 kids doesn't fit in with our religious beliefs, we're not going to help you, then that's terrible. And that group should not be getting government money, because that would be discrimination based on, sexual orientation. And look, when I say Salvation Army is great, I'm talking about how they look after the poor and the fundraising they do and that kind of stuff as well. I'm not saying I'm not giving them a perfect
historically they haven't had great track record with the queer community. So that's exactly the example that I'm talking about.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a cop-out. It's a cop-out. He wants to sell these homes. He wants to move them on from something else. It's what National did before. They tried to offload all of their state housing in whatever condition they were to organizations like the Salvation Army. That was their policy. And because they're in such shit condition, Salvation Army said no, thank you. And then National went, okay, see, we tried. Now we're going to sell them on the open market.
Yeah,
That's what happened last time.
Yep. Okay, let me also, I'm not saying I'm retracting, because I actually believe the Sallies do a lot of good things, but there are a lot of people in there saying they've had experiences with the Sallies, especially in the LGBT community, and say they're shithouse at that. I accept that. I guess when I hear I'm speaking about them doing good work, I'm thinking about their Christmas appeals, and they're looking after children, and they're looking after the poor. So let's just say that they do some good work, and they've got some questionable things that I don't know.
I think that's fair, and I hope that they're learning from it. But yeah,
but it'll be a good question to ask tomorrow. Let's get back to this question about community housing providers.
Do more building. The second piece is, how do we actually make sure we get people out of houses, out of motels, and out of cars that have often been there for more than 3 months or 12 weeks, and actually make them priority one and move them to the top of the wait list.
I need us to remember this as well, because this is going to come back in the next clip I play, right? That they have a priority of getting people out of houses, out of motels and out of cars. Just earmark that for the next part of the conversation.
And the third bit is, we've got to do a review of Kaingaora, because there's a number of things going
because they're
horribly
shit
wrong
house.
there. And so we want them to be able to evict unruly tenants that are causing major problems. We want them to be able to go through their procurement and asset management exercises when Ministry of Housing and Urban Development says there's some challenges there. So we need to make sure that they're functioning in a much better way as well.
So to my question, how much new funding are you committing to?
Well, we're committing to what the government's funded.
Beyond what the government's funded?
No,
because they've limited their funding for a couple of years. So
we're on the same track. There's plenty of money there. There's $5 billion.
Beyond what the government has committed, what are you committing?
Well, what we're committing to is exactly the same track as what the government has committed.
So you're going to build more state houses than the government, but with the same amount of money.
We're going to make sure we actually deliver houses through Kaingaora. They're doing as much as they can do, but importantly also community housing.
So how many homes are you going to build?
We think we'll add about 6,000 homes. We actually hope to have about 80,000 social housing in place by over 4 years. Over 4 year period.
6,000 over 4 years.
6,000 extra
new houses
to 80,000 social houses available here in New Zealand.
So just be
same track as the government.
Right, your target is to
build budget, same number of houses.
The same number.
So basically, Labor is crap and can't do it, but we'll do it using all the same budgetary constraints and everything around it. But they can't, but we will. And that comes up through this conversation again and again and again. How? Oh, just trust us. I mean, he doesn't use those words, but again and again and again.
Number of houses. So actually, no difference when it comes to the state housing.
Well,
providing.
No, but the way we'll have more houses will actually be the fact we're going to build more houses in the private market. We're going to restore the private functioning of that rental market, so we actually get more landlords putting more rental properties available, and we'll continue to maintain the government's track on social housing. The mix by which we do that.
No, but for social housing, just to be totally clear, for social housing, you're going to build the same number of houses as the government. You're going to put no extra funding into it, but you are going to increase.
Well, funding's not the problem here, right?
Of housing.
There is plenty of funding there. The question is the delivery,
right?
And so we want better delivery out of KO. We want to be able to give capital and funding into community housing providers who are doing an exceptionally good job.
But not committing any additional funding, just to be clear.
No, we don't need to. We don't need.
All right. Point number one, don't need to. And yes, look, someone's in the chat has also mentioned Rawiri's conversation. We don't have time to do all of them. I watched the start of that, and I have to say equally, Jack's questioning of Rawiri was similar, and he didn't seem to have all the answers to the points that they were making. I think if we have time, maybe tomorrow we will include that in the conversation as well. I'm not saying it's not important, but I am saying it's less important for a minority party who would not be government. And I'm not saying in government should left get there, but this is the potential next prime minister. So there is a heavier weight to make sure that we let people know about the next prime minister than a minor party who may or may not be there in a government. But yes, Chewie, you're going to say?
Luxon knows that COVID exists, right? And that's kind of been a big thing. Like in all of these statements, I've never seen any acknowledgement of the challenges of COVID.
Of course they don't, because that's a reason what's happening. They can't just go Labor bad.
Why haven't Labor built all of these houses in a global pandemic? Why has Labor absolutely trashed the tourism industry for no apparent reason? It just all circles back to the same thing. Has he got more? Do I
Yeah,
need
dude.
to hold my anger?
Yeah, you probably do. But I have to tell you,
Okay.
Chewy,
Holding.
we're
Holding.
coming up to a part of the conversation that makes me very, 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 very angry. In fact,
I
I was
encourage it.
I was sitting in a hall on Sunday night thinking about this part of the conversation, getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And many of you will not understand why I'm angry, because it has a lot to do with my religious upbringing. So for people who are new to us, I've had a big involvement with the church, and I grew up in the Catholic Church and stuff. So I know a lot about the faith, the Christian faith, right? And he says something in here 3 or 4 times, and it made my blood boil. It really, really did. And I'll point it out when it's happening. You may not understand it, but trust me, if you're someone who's been involved in the church world, which I have in the past, you might get it. But it's a good tease, isn't it, to see what's coming up? You're all intrigued now, aren't you? So one part of this conversation with Jack that he just had, he was talking about unruly tenants and getting rid of unruly tenants.
Oh, yeah.
And this is this part of the conversation where he's talking about getting rid of unruly tenants. Now, I just talked before about how I put some talk back up today that I did 11 years ago, and the then National Party was talking about cutting people's benefits. And the question I asked my audience then was, so that's cool. And it was about 40,000, the number of 40. And I was like, so when those 40,000 people have their benefits cut, then what? Do you think that's going to, for example, drive crime numbers down or up? What happens next? I remember another time doing talkback when they were talking about solo mums with gang affiliations living in a state house and that house causing trouble. And like, they just wanted this house, the street just wanted this house evicted. And I'm like, okay, I understand why. I would be with you in finding that difficult. But then what? Then what's a really good question? So, okay, so this mum with 3, 4, 5 kids is now evicted from her house. Then what? Because she could be living in a car at the end of your driveway. Like, then what? What happens next? What's the follow-up? You have to listen to this to see the callous nature of national politics. National meaning national party. Because I realized today when listening to 12, 13-year-old talkback that I did, that it was the same fucking arguments back there about just kicking these people off and cutting them off. So Jack Tame's going to ask him about all these people, unruly people, which he said in the first clip, and being able to evict them.
So your party wants to reform kāinga order, as you mentioned, so they can more easily evict people for antisocial behaviour.
There's some very big challenges.
So where would those people go once they're evicted?
Well, look, that'll be a responsibility of kāinga order to find that. But what we can't have...
So, I don't know. Where would they go? I don't know. Not there, somewhere else?
No, here's the deal.
No.
Let me tell you where they're going to go.
No, okay, please explain where they're going to go. If they're subject to antisocial
here's the
behaviour,
problem, right?
Where do they go?
In the last 14 months, there's been 10,000 complaints of unruly behaviour and also antisocial behaviour in kāinga order properties, right? There's only been 2 evictions of tenants.
So where should they go? If you're going to evict more tenants, I understand the problem, but I want to understand your solution. Where do they go?
Yeah, so let me just tell you. So the reality is that there is now 24,000 people on the State House wait list. There were 6,000 when this government came to power. There are 20,000.
You're not answering my question. No, you're actually not answering my question. Okay, so you can please answer it now.
Yeah.
Where do those tenants that you have evicted from kāinga order homes go?
That will be up for KO to move those tenants out of those properties and find accommodation for them.
This is where I said, but listen, this is where I said, remember the cars and motels. So they have a focus 5 minutes ago in this conversation where he says getting people out of cars and motels. Now they're evicting people from kāinga order, from houses, from Housing New Zealand houses. Chewy, I mean, could you possibly think where they might end up being? Maybe in fucking cars and motels. So you'll take them out from here and chuck them back in there. Hello? Are you thinking about this? Now, I haven't even got to the part which made me most mad, Chewy, but I'm already heated. Let's keep going.
So you're just going to be, just to be clear, you're going to be moving the problem to someone else.
I'm going to be prioritising those that want a state house, that deserve a state house, that can't get one, over those that are not disrespecting a state house.
But you just...
Okay, so I'll come back to why, and it's the word deserve a state house. Those that deserve a state house. And it's not the first time he says it. Keep listening.
You are moving the deck chairs, right? You're saying, okay, you can't stay in this kainga or order house. We're going to go and dump you somewhere else where presumably the antisocial behaviour continues.
Well, but the antisocial behaviour cannot carry on in a kainga or a complex, Jack. It's just not fair, right? It's not fair. Let's have a
No. I mean,
it
sounds good, right? When you say, oh, we're going to kick people out of their homes for being if they're subject to
social
behaviour. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
But where do they go? It's not like they just disappear.
No, what I'm interested in is I'm interested in the 24,000 people that are on a social housing wait list that actually deserve a home, that want their shot at a home. Let's be clear about the deal here. The taxpayer is actually paying for those state houses. So if people aren't prepared to take the right of having access to one and have accompanied that with the responsibility of looking after it and looking after their neighbourhoods, we want them out of there and we'll put others in there that deserve it.
Relative to incomes.
Deserve it. So bear with me, all right? Because I'm going to struggle to get through this and keep my cool. Two things. The people who he's classifying as antisocial, they are possibly the most or more vulnerable people of society than many others. The reason they're antisocial is through a lifetime of hardship. You don't get fucking children of doctors from Remuera or Māori Hill here in Dunedin who end up in social housing being disruptive, being unruly, being antisocial. You get children who have had the worst, hardest upbringing, who have addiction, who have mental health issues. They turn into antisocial adults. And this national government is saying, fuck you guys, you are out of here. Where are you going to go? How are we going to wrap around these people? I don't know. That's part one. Part two, this idea of deserving households. This is where it gets in my I guess culture a little bit. Because I was raised religious, I understand what the best of that religion is. It's looking after the widows and orphans, you know? It's giving someone the shirt off your back if they need it. This fucker goes around New Zealand and he said it publicly. He uses that tagline Christian. He talks about how important it is to him. This is where I will get to a bit that many of you may not understand because it's a theological conversation, right? It's a deep thinking religious conversation. The religion that he follows, he doesn't deserve. The religion that he follows has a tenet in it that says no one deserves this, but the central figure of that religion says, even though you don't deserve what I'm going to give you, he gives it anyway. That's the central message of that religion. And then this fucker who represents this religion says to the most vulnerable, fuck you, you don't deserve a roof over your head. And I, Chewy, am furious. Your turn.
Yes. My whole issue with this is that it's purely optics, right? It's the standard tough on crime because being poor is a crime. And it is that single issue. National never think about the flow-on effects of what they're saying. We've heard that we're going to cut government departments and that sort of thing. We're going to crack down on Kaingaora. We're going to crack down on a whole bunch of government departments. They're just not going to be able to do as much as they're able to do now, right? We're going to kick people out of their homes. We're probably going to absolutely slash mental health, and we're going to move these people off into the weeds. If they're in a government-provided home, then you have a lot more control. You have a lot more contact. Like they've been trialing accommodation with wraparound social housing care, pastoral care, exactly what he's talking about. and they're not seeing the bigger picture of what is the best thing that we can do to break the cycle of poverty and crime. As you break the cycle, you get to the kids.
So not to the people who need it most of all.
Punish mum for making bad choices because she was raised wrong and her contact with gangs. So that's where the kids came from, and now she's unemployable. And so we're just dooming these kids to the same thing. We're just
because
what
what he's literally saying, and this is the callous nature of national party politics, right-wing politics, is big. Yes, okay, they cause trouble, no question. You know, I've been a landlord,
and it's super hard to live next to that.
Completely,
like you can acknowledge both things.
But they're also the people who are possibly needing the most help. And his response is, we have to set up a system that puts them on the street. How will that help? I don't know. It's Kainga-Ora's problem, but Kainga-Ora sucks at their job is what he's saying. But it's their problem. But they suck at their job. But it's their problem. What are you going to do? Well, it's their problem. And this comes back to this conversation we had last week with, sorry, I'm shaking, man. Comes back to that conversation we had with Simon Wilson last week. For people who are part of that faith, right, it's really important that they have an outworking of their faith. You need to be able to see it in them. So that either means one of two things. Either his religion is all shit, which it may well be. Lots of American politics in the right claim this title and aren't, right? So it either means his religion is all shit, his faith, his beliefs are all shit, or it means his politics are all shit. Because if he does adhere to that, then he's not living by this innate part of him, which is supposed to be the most important part. And if he doesn't believe it, then stop grabbing onto the label. It just makes me furious. Just be a good person. Be a good person, Christopher Luxon. Just be a good person.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right, Pat. He needs to be called on this.
He won't talk to us, though, will he? Wonder why.
No, of course not. Just a sneaky wee side issue that I think dovetails.
Please tangent me away, Chewy.
Quite nicely. Sorry, I'm just grabbing it because it just popped into my mind as we're talking about. Because the only way you can solve this, right, is by punishing people.
Well, that's right? It. They have it. There's two ways to do this: carrot or stick.
You kick them out in the street.
Yeah, they just
kick them out in the street until they. So when they're on the street in the cold with their kids, nobody knows where they are.
Yeah.
Then they've got the time to have a big old think. And a big old, they'll just brush up their CV and they'll get their shit back together. Just because we've put them in the naughty step of no house, right? There's a couple of countries that have been trying this and finding out that it doesn't work, and now we're starting to see countries that are going to try something else. So this happened over in Canada. They did a trial where they gave homeless people $7,500, no conditions. No requirements, just here's $7,500 to see if that helps your situation.
Wow.
They found, and I'll put the link to this up in the chat so you can read it through yourself. They found that they got a better return on that money than a lot of their other government programs. These people used that money effectively to get off the street because there is very few people that want to be on the street. Finland tried a similar sort of thing, a universal basic income. And there was no requirements to do anything, to register for something. It was just like, you've been selected for this trial, see how you go. Similar thing. The UK has trialed a universal basic income with heaps of conditions, and it hasn't worked. So this is the whole thing when we're talking about, this isn't working, so we need to look backwards for the good ideas of evictions and putting people on the streets. Like he's disparaging of motels without considering why the motels were an option. Yeah. We had an absolute dearth of social housing because National ran them down and sold them off. And then we went into a pandemic with fuck all housing stock there. And we went, we don't want people in the street during a pandemic. we've got a whole bunch of empty motels here. I'm seeing a quick solution to this problem. Let's buy some hotels. We got small units, we can get people off the street. That came from a good place.
Yeah.
It's outstayed its welcome, but the idea was solid. The no evictions thing, same thing. That was during the pandemic. That was like, let's try something else. We're not going to evict people during a pandemic. There might be unintended consequences with that. It doesn't mean the whole idea is bad.
Yeah.
You know, it's this short-term thinking with National that has always been the problem. They don't think of the consequences. They don't have a cohesive structure to what they're doing. They're bouncing around from, this will make people vote for us. This sounds good in a press bite, and it's as shallow as a paddling pool. And these are people's lives that they're talking about.
Yeah. No.
There's kids living in fucking station wagons, man. Are we going back to that? Is that what he means by get New Zealand back on track? Because that's what it was, right? All the good ideas are behind us. Let's go back to the 80s where we really punished the poor. Asshole.
Trisha Lawrence, big thanks for getting a hoodie during the show. Appreciate that. Good on you. Look, we're going to move on to the next part of this conversation. I think I've blown my foo-foo valve for long enough on that. You can get angry at this one. There's plenty of it to get angry at, trust me. So let's have a look
I've got 5 more weeks of this.
Yeah, I know. We're all going to lose a lot of weight in the next 5 weeks from just stress. I'm sweating like no under blooming belief in here. Right. Great. This is a great piece of interviewing from young Jack Tame. He is talking about he's asking about the modeling. Nicola Willis talked a lot about the modeling they did, right? And we all know that the modeling they did didn't include some pretty important things. So he's asking now about the modeling on how Nationals planned for removing the 10-year bright line test, and also giving interest, or being interest deductible back to landlords. So he's asked him for the modeling for those two things and how that would impact house prices, right? And Luxon at some stage in this conversation uses the phrase, that what they're going to do will put a downward pressure on rent. And then there is the greatest chef's kiss you have ever seen in your life coming from Jack Tame.
That time. So what modelling have you done on the impact of reinstating interest deductibility and lowering the bright line test on house prices?
Well, what I can tell you is going to put downward pressure on.
So
rent,
my question is,
right?
what modelling have you done?
Well, we know what the answers are, because Treasury did the modelling.
Okay,
Treasury said the modelling was actually going to add up to $50 a week in terms of average rent.
It currently doesn't understand the conversation
because of the bright line test and because of interest deductibility.
So hang on, it's going to increase rents under your...
No, it has. And
no. So my question is, what modelling have you done on the impact on house prices of reintroducing interest deductibility and lowering the bright line test? That's my question.
Well, what I'm saying to you is I haven't done specific modelling.
Okay, you haven't done modelling.
But what I'd say to you is, when you want to open up greenfields like we want to, with councils zoning 30 years of housing growth and demand,
scrap the medium density residential standards, which is something you also want to do.
Yeah. But they densify over transport.
So you haven't modelled that. It was a crisis. I'm sorry, it was a crisis at the end of the last national government. And I note that net migration's back at almost record levels now, 86,000 to the end of June. So under your policy settings, what is to stop us from ending up in exactly the same position as we did in 2017?
Well, I tell you, we are determined to make action in the housing market, and we've got to do 3 things.
So we are determined, again, means trust us.
At the same time.
Unlike all the previous governments.
Well, they haven't executed it, right? And they haven't determined it. And whether it's been previous National or Labor governments, I don't really care. I'm focused on the future to make sure we solve a housing problem in New Zealand.
But you are returning those policy settings to exactly the ones we had that led to the crisis in the first place.
It's absolute rubbish.
So what's different?
So let's take it through. So if you want to actually build more houses so people can actually buy a house and have a shot at being able to do that, you need to be able to get councils and towns across New Zealand tomorrow to go out and actually rezone land for 30 years of housing growth. You then need to introduce innovative funding and financing tools that encourage developers to actually get in and actually develop those developments.
Helping the developers.
Other things that exist around the world that we haven't applied completely in New Zealand. And then thirdly, we're going to pay councils for participating in that growth by actually saying for every house that you deliver over the 5-year average.
But you're also going to remove the compulsion around medium density, right? So you're going to say that, I mean, that's also your policy, right? Let's not shy away from that.
We want to deliver the number of houses that are needed to deliver the population growth and the growth in the city. A council can determine whether they keep those medium density rules. Some may do that. Others may choose to actually densify their cities over transport hubs, which we fully support, or open up greenfields. They have to deliver a number of houses, right? The same number of houses.
Are you going to lower your rents, the properties that you rent out?
It's not about me, Jack.
No, but
So, my lovely people, Chewy's having trouble with his internet right now. My lovely people, there is a plan for downward pressure on rent. There is a plan by National for making the rental properties cheaper. So the question, I don't know if you missed that question, Chewy, because you're having a few issues. The question that Jack Tame asks is, are you going to
Pat,
lower...
I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you, so I'm going to be back in a wee sec.
Are you going to lower the rent on your properties? So he is asking him the question. Luxon says our policies are going to have downward pressure on rent, i.e. they're going to bring rents down. So, Mr. Luxon, are you going to reduce your
hubs, which
rents?
we fully support.
Is what he asks.
Greenfields, they have to deliver a number of houses, right? The same number of houses.
Are you going to lower your rents, the properties that you rent out?
It's not about me, Jack.
No, but you've said that your settings are going to lead to lower rents.
You talk about my properties every time.
No, it's a simple question. Yeah, I know. Well,
that's pretty simple.
Reasonable, isn't it? I mean, you've got multiple investment properties. So will you be lowering your rents?
What I'll be saying to you is that we are going to put downward pressure on rents by actually unwinding the bright line test from 10 to 2 years.
So they're going to put downward pressure on rents, i.e. rents will go down. Mr. Luxon, are you going to lower your rents? Any landlord in New Zealand, are you going to lower your rents?
Right.
And unwinding interest deductibility and changing some of the tenancy laws.
Okay, so will you be lowering your rent?
That is advice that the government put in place to this government. Treasury put into.
So again, you're not answering my question. So you say there's going to be downward pressure on rents. So will you be lowering your rent?
It's not about me, Jack. I don't know. I haven't thought that through, and I'm not thinking.
You know what, mate?
I mean, why would you not think it through? I mean, you've obviously thought through everything that leads to downward pressure.
No, just let's zoom out a little bit. We have a housing problem in New Zealand. We have talked about this for years. This government under 6 years has actually made...
It's beautiful, this, because yes, okay, we have a housing problem. One of those housing problems is rents is too high. National then would be government saying, we're going to do things to lower rental prices. Okay, Mr. Luxon, are you going to lower your rental prices? It's completely a brilliant question and absolutely reasonable to ask. And of course, there is no answer.
Things worse, and it's been an absolute failure. You've got to work on all three components of housing.
And
so one is
you are reinstating the incentives that led to the problem in the first place.
No,
what does it say about your values?
Mate, I disagree
that in
with
the middle of a cost of living crisis,
why don't we have
your funding cuts.
Why don't we have that chat? Because you just made a statement there that we're reinstating something that's causing a problem that we've had in the past.
I'm saying you're reinstating incentives for landlords.
And bright line test and interest deductibility, the official advice from the Treasury and from the IRD to this government was do not do this. Why? Because it's adding cost to landlords that will lead to higher rents and therefore less properties.
But I'm saying, but that doesn't address my question around incentives for landlords, though. That's an incentive for landlords.
We need.
That
we need
doesn't mean that removing them.
I have been in emergency accommodation where people lost a house that they had a private landlord arrangement. The rents went up $50 a week, and they find themselves now in a motel accommodation. So this is quite serious stuff.
No, I agree.
We can be flippant about it, or we can actually try and solve it. And what we're saying is we've got to solve the home ownership piece. We have to solve the
how. Yeah, you're telling what has to be solved, but haven't told us how yet. Show us your workings, Mr. Luxon.
Would be to actually build what we call build to rent products. They've just started to emerge in New Zealand. We want to turbocharge that. And then on the social housing piece, we need KO doing its job with greater effectiveness.
Kicking people out, not telling us where they're going to be.
No, because it's not acceptable, frankly, to be able to take a state house.
Well, the good news is that once they're kicked out, the problem just disappears.
I want
to talk about values. We've got to keep moving. We've got to keep
all the respect. You can't have 10,000 people actually, 10,000 complaints and only 2
If you could tell me, I've given you so many opportunities to tell me where they go. That's the problem, right? Like if you could snap their fingers and make the problem go away.
Properties, they need to be evicted.
Okay. So it's still going to be a problem for the community, though, for the people who live around.
But actually, for the people that are on wait list who desperately want a house, they get their shot at getting one.
Climate.
Fair enough.
So you've hit.
There you go. That's it.
I know where those people end up. We've talked about it here on the show.
Yeah.
So they can't be in Kayangaroa homes, right? Because they're not deserving, right? So they go somewhere else. So where would they go? would they be delivered directly to the hands of the least ethical, most predatory slumlords in the country?
Yeah.
Would that be where we're delivering them? Would
Yeah.
that be like you've seen in the news down here, the old Carisbrook Hotel that got turned into emergency housing that was getting government funding for people that couldn't find anywhere else, and they got a room with no bed, no bathroom access, no cooking facilities, no care. But the landlord, well, he was getting $400 a week from people. You know, and the question, like, he fundamentally misunderstands. Like, yes, Treasury said, hey, look, bright line test, interest deductibility removal does add pressure onto landlords, and they might put their rents up to account for that. But that does not mean that removing those things will mean those same landlords will go, oh, sweet, well, I can reduce rents by $50. That has not ever happened, and it will not happen. So he doesn't understand that either. And then he fumbles the biggest opportunity to smack a question back at Jack Tame and show a shred of leadership.
Yep.
You own 7 properties. Are you going to bring your rents down? It would have been so fucking easy to go, yes, I will.
Yep.
And I encourage every private landlord out there to do the same.
Yep. It feels a bit like when they used to do telethon. I'm contributing $15 and I challenge everyone who lives in West Auckland to do the same. It could have been a great line. Yeah.
He may not even follow through on that. We wouldn't know, but he would have survived that interview.
Gosh, that'd be an interesting
brain
conversation.
Doesn't even go there because, and you can quote me on this, Christopher Luxon is fucking bad at this. He is bad at politics. He is a bad leader. He will be an absolute liability should he be Prime Minister. Oh.
But in all of that, they're doing great in the polls. So left people, if you don't want to see that walking thumb as your Prime Minister, get out and vote. It's an uphill struggle. It's an uphill struggle.